Are we set, Carly? Okay.
Yep, we're recording.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm Molly Zimmerman. I'm the Managing Director of the New York State Science and Technology Law Center here at Syracuse University College of Law's Innovation Law Center. We're very happy today to have Gary Brennan here with us. Gary is a medical FDA consultant. He has a broad knowledge and background. He's worked with Fresenius, Welsh Allen, ConMed. He consults with J&J, Becton Dickinson, and Medtronic. His background is in regulatory affairs, quality systems, risk analysis, technical file creation, design controls, and product labeling. At these sessions held monthly, we invite people to come and bring their questions about different topics. And we are just so happy to have Gary here to present about the FDA and answer your questions about some of those topics. So Gary, welcome. Thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see my screen? I'll first ask that question.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, again, my name is Gary Brennan, and I started consulting full-time. To give you some background, back in January. I've been a part-time consultant now for about 2.5 years. And as Molly alluded to, I worked many different product lines with the ConMed, some disposables, products require sterilization. I worked at Welch Allen, did some device monitors and things like that for blood pressure cuffs and things like that. So, and then for Fresenius, I worked on dialysis machines. I got a pretty broad background in regulatory across different product lines. So give you some ideas in case you have questions that if you're in the meeting that maybe targeted for those kind of products, so please let me know. But again, just wanted to, for this presentation, Mao and I thought it'd be kind of most appropriate to kind of figure out, topics that usually startup companies typically are concerned with. So the topics that we thought would be appropriate for the presentation are device classification, kind of we'll go over that. What is a predicate device? We'll discuss what a predicate device is. A lot of stuff out there for software is medical device. We'll touch upon design controls and what that actually means. We'll look at FDA medical device submission types. We'll go through that a little bit, and we'll talk about some recent guidance documents from the FDA that are usually very appropriate for startup companies because typically their devices are new things, and usually are definitely a better mousetrap, so to speak. And the FDA wants to get those devices to the market quickly, so they develop two guidances to get those kind of devices to market quicker, and that's the breakthrough technology and the safer technology guidance. What that allows you to do is we'll go through in more detail in the presentation. It allows you to get through the FDA a little bit more quickly in terms of getting your approval or clearance for your device. We'll spend a little bit on device standards, and then we'll talk about the promotional material review and claims, which is very important for medical devices. So any questions on the topics, and feel free, there's more things you want to talk about. We should have plenty of time to ask questions. If there's things on this list that you or not on this list, I should say, that you want to talk about, please bring them up, and we can keep this very informal. And please feel free to jump in for any questions. But I'll go through the slides again. Jump in if you have questions, or if even questions may not be related to this topics. Please feel free to ask.
Yes, and if you want to put your question in the chat box, I'll be looking at that. Gary, I don't know if you want to make your screen full mode. What was it called? I will also put, Carly, if you wouldn't mind putting in our FDA guidebook link and the link to Gary's LinkedIn page that has more information about him.
Is that better? Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
So first thing we'll talk about regulatory definitions. And just to be clear, sometimes everything you develop may not actually be a medical device. So just want to be clear, for the FDA, what they define as a medical device, and again, it's pretty much right from the FDA Code of Federal Regulations, an instrument, apparatus, implement, machine, contravenience, implant, in vitro reagent, or other similar or related article, including a component part or accessory, which is recognized in the official national formulary or of the United States Pharmacopoeia or any supplement therein. So basically what they're saying is, it's basically intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or other animals, or intended to affect the structure of any function of the body of man or other animals, which does not achieve its primary intended purposes through chemical action. So what this basically is saying, it's not a drug. So the drug is going down different pathways, but if a medical device meets these definitions, then actually what is a medical device, it would fall under the regulations of the FDA. Just a thing here, I'll clarify what is a regulation, and it's a rule or directive made and maintained by an authority. What applies to us is the Code of Federal Regulations. Again, you see the term the CFR. The CFR is a codification of the general and permanent rules that are published in the Federal Register by the executive departments and agencies of the federal government. Is divided into 50 titles that represent broad areas subject to federal regulation. So what we're concerned with is the CFR 820. And what the CFR 820 is the stuff that is applicable for medical devices and things that are similar to medical devices. So when we say CFR 820, we're talking about those regulations that are appropriate for medical devices that, as in regulatory, we have to be concerned with and meet those regulations and the requirements.
Gary, I know you're going to go into this a little bit more, but we get a lot of questions about, is software that supports certain types of medical devices also a medical device? What about wellness devices and combination devices?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, sure. Because it's kind of three questions there, right? So first of all, does the software actually meet the definition of a medical device? That's the first thing you'd probably do. So that wellness device, if it's really not providing a medical function, and if it's just telling you, to do more steps, things like that, that would not be quote unquote a medical device. If that's actually telling you to, by the way, your medication, your heart rate is low, and then you may need to increase your medication or call a doctor, that may constitute a medical device or software as a medical device. It's actually making a decision based on a reading that's taken off your body. So you'll see quite a few of those things in terms of wellness devices, and how you differentiate those between an actual medical device and a wellness device is actually what that software actually does. Okay.
And in terms of this determining wellness devices versus medical devices, can you talk a little bit about whether, or would you rather do that later?
We could talk about it now. I can give an example. I worked with one about a year and a half ago where there's some in the Syracuse area hospital developed a device that would actually measure a person's mood. And what he was trying to do was reduce some of the constant back and forth between medical marijuana. And we talked about quite a bit whether it be a wellness device or a medical device. And I told him his first thing he should do is kind of get us a wellness device first, because that would basically be an indication that, okay, are you feeling good or bad? But and then from that point of view, he said, well, can this recommend to change your dosage level of of the two active chemicals that are in medical marijuana? Once you cross that threshold, that would then be a medical device, because it's actually making a decision for you about what to do. So there's some gray areas there too, because if you have an indication where they just be say call your doctor, there's things there that, again, it's one of those software medical, it's very gray area, and really up to the FDA sometimes. They do sometimes better to tell you what they think it is versus kind of going in down a path. So we'll talk about pre-subs later on, but sometimes these software medical devices do fall in that gray area. And I'd recommend if it's in that gray area, that you definitely get the FDA's concurrence about what they think that device is. Is it just a wellness device, or actually is it indeed a medical device?
Thank you.
Yep. So this first thing here, we talk about medical devices. What does the FDA want? The FDA wants, devices that cannot cause harm. It seems pretty obvious, but back in its day, that the whole idea of the FDA is to protect the public. Device must perform as designed and intended according to the claims made in the labeling. You'll see this quite a bit I gave a recent example. I'm consulting for Johnson & Johnson, and one of their competitors actually is very much in tune to how they label things. So if they label something they know is maybe incorrect, that can go to court. They may feel it as an unfair advantage. So it's very important that, whatever you say your device does, it can actually do. So again, the FDA wants, devices that are safe and effective, the device cannot cause harm, and the device must perform as designed and intended according to what your claims are in your basically instructions for use or marketing literature.
Gary, we often get people who have startups that have websites, and they also, we sometimes caution them to be careful about what they're putting on the website. I don't know if you want to address that at all.
No, it's a very good point, because some people forget websites, and also, I've done a lot of reviews for Johnson & Johnson recently for websites, even Instagram posts, web posts, just blurbs. All this stuff has to get reviewed. It's a good point, Molly. Some people forget about this. They're thinking about this hard copy literature, but no, it goes across the board. It goes across into any type of promotional advertising, whether it's a Facebook, it could be any of those things, any types of electronic media. They're all under the same regulations. And have to, people and myself in regulatory or people in legal will look at those things very carefully before those are approved for distribution.
Great, thanks.
The FDA also classifies devices, and they're based on risk. So class 1 would be the lowest risk class. Class 2 is quote unquote a medium, and class 3 is the highest risk class. And based on those classification, really, basically gives you the indication of how much work the manufacturer has to do. Class 1 device, again, doesn't require pre-market approval or pre-market clearance. You hear the term pre-market clearance. Class 2 requires FDA pre-market clearance, and that's typically a 510K type submission. And then a class 3 pretty much is a high-risk device. And then you'll see a term, you heard the term PMA, or pre-market approval, which actually means there's a lot more work to get that device approved in the market. Just some examples, go with class 3 devices. You've probably seen robotic surgeries. Of course, that'd be a good example of kind of a class 3 device in terms of, it's very complex. The risk of that device, if it did not perform as intended, it could kill somebody. So of course, the FDA is going to want to have a lot of jurisdiction to review of that device before it goes to market. A class 2 device, and I spent most of my time working on class 2 devices in my career, with like a device monitor, like a blood pressure cuff, blood pressure monitor, SpO2, things like that actually monitors the blood patient. That'd be kind of a class 2 device. Again, it's still a critical device. You want to make sure that's right. And then a class 1 device, the simplest one, of course, would be a tongue compressor, but things of that nature where, again, it could be a wellness device. If it's considered a device, that could also be a class 1 device, where it's really not, if it doesn't perform as intended, the risk to the patient or the user is minimal. So those type of things could be a class 1 device. And it's all really based on risk of if the device does not perform as intended, what can happen. So the FDA wants to make sure these devices come into them that based on a class 1, what they feel from a class 1 device is there's controls or design controls that if you just basically abide by design controls and a good quality system, that there's enough protection there within that system of quality documents and doing things as part of the QSR that they don't really need to approve that device before it goes into market. For a class 2 device, again, FDA will get the device, you'll do a submission to them, whether it's a 510K or abbreviated 510K, and they'll go to the FDA for a clearance. And then for a class 3 device, again, it's a lot more, usually more clinical work's involved, and that requires a PMA or pre-market approval.
Gary, can you say generally whether an improvement or a new class 1 device that has minimal risk, is there any FDA submission that has to be made in those type of cases?
There is not, as long as that change does not change the risk class. So if you're still a class 1 device, you can still make that change. You document that in your files, in basically your design history file, but no, you do not need to submit that to the FDA. As long as you stay within your class and you're not changing things, they would move that device to a higher risk class.
Thanks.
Well, this is Dom.
Sure.
And when you first apply for class 1, what would you submit?
Go ahead.
Just a letter saying that this is a class 1, in our opinion?
Well, there's just two things, right? You still need to be an established facility, right? So they're going to realize, okay, this company now is establishing itself as a class of medical device manufacturer. So they're going to have that on record. But in terms of an actual submission to the FDA, they don't need to, review the device before it goes to market. You still need the requirements of the, again, the quality system regulation in terms of the having a quality system, having all those things in place, so they can come audit you. So if you put the device in the market and you don't have the quote unquote the quality system in place, like you said you're supposed to have, they'll pull the device off the market. But the thing is, what they're saying is from class 1 to class 2 to class 3, for all those classifications, you still need a quality system that meets the requirements. You still need to meet all the purchasing controls and all that. You still need to control the device. What they're saying is they don't really need to see kind of pre-submission to allow the device to go to market. That's really the difference. But each of those cases still need to be an established medical device facility for all those. So they will see that down. So you'll be recorded in their database as a medical device manufacturer.
So you don't have to even tell them that you're about to sell this device.
No, not for a class 1.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank
But you do need to make sure again that you're an established facility, and so indirectly you're telling them when you do that establishment registration, you are telling them that what kind of products you're actually going to make. So indirectly you're saying that you're just not getting a quote unquote an approval for that particular device. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yep. So you are telling them indirectly in that by establishing your facility.
Good. Thanks.
Yep, sure. Indications for use, intended use. These are terms that I think Maui and I have seen quite a bit in our help out with some of the startup companies that we've seen, in two terms that are very much confused but very important. Indications for use is the indication of use is the disease or condition the device will diagnose, treat, prevent, cure, or mitigate, including description of the target patient population. Okay, indication for use in kind of a simplest term is the conditions or reasons for using the device. But I'll get back to a blood pressure cuff. Blood pressure cuff is used to, monitor blood pressure. Pretty straightforward, and it's indicated to measure blood pressure, right? Intended use is the general usage of a medical product that you put in the label. So this is kind of the broader, overarching usage of how the medical device is used. It usually includes indications for use. So if you write intended use, you usually include the indication for use as part of your intended use, and you may broaden it out to get the more broad intended use of the device. And intended use and kind of what you say in the label, the device is to be used for. Again, these things can be very complex, and it's something you definitely want to get before you do a submission to the FDA. You want to make sure these things are very clear, and to make sure that when you put this in the label, you can support what's on the label. For example, if you go to the blood pressure cuff example, if you had the indication of blood pressure use, but intended to use, you may say is intended to be used on, these kind of people that could be a contraindication. It's not to be used on these type of people. So there's going to be some things here that you're going to be broadened out in terms of the intended use that would either somehow enhance the indication for use, so it's clear of how the device can be used safe and effectively. Like there's some device for I'll get at Welch Allen, we had devices that were for remote blood pressure monitoring, right? So indications for use would still be to measure blood pressure, but the intended use is actually broadening out. It can be used in the home environment. So again, it broadens out how that device should be used. Everyone's seen now in probably convenience stores or even Walgreens, that kind of stuff, where you can actually buy home blood pressure monitors. So the intended use of that device is to be used in the home, but it's still indications for use is still to measure blood pressure. Okay. Predicate device. This is also something that comes up a lot during startup company. What is predicate device? When you do basically typically it's a class 2 device that you're doing a 510K, and a 510K pretty much is basically a comparison versus a predicate device that says that your device that you want to get cleared and to sell is something that is substantially equivalent to that legally marketed US device. So substantial equivalence is established with respect to intended use, design, energy used or delivered, materials, performance, safety, effectiveness, labeling, biocompatibility standards, and other applicable characteristics. So the whole idea of a predicate device and substantial equivalence for the FDA is saying there's a device on the market, and the device I want to sell is very similar to that. And I'm going to compare my device to that device that's already been cleared by the FDA, and basically try to get the FDA to agree that yes, your device is just as safe and as effective as the devices are on the market. And because of that, you can now sell your device.
Okay, Gary, I've got a question.
Sure.
You have more than one predicate, and say the material that you're using is from one predicate, but the intended use and is from a different predicate.
So it's a good question, actually. So typically you choose one predicate device, which is probably closest to your device that you want to sell. Another term they come up with actually is a good segue to my next slide here, is something called a reference device. So for those things that aren't really covered in your predicate device, you can use a reference device, and usually you do that when the scientific technology is different, right? So I can go back to this example, like worked at Welch Allyn, many different kinds of thermometers, right? You have infrared, you have rectal, you have oral, all kinds of things. You have they're all different technologies, right? They're all measuring temperature, right? So the intended use and stuff is the same, but say the technology is different. Say there was no infrared thermometer on the market, right? But infrared was used someplace else for some other kind of diagnosis. You could use a reference device that does infrared, compare that versus your device. So you usually have one predicate device and then a reference device.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yep. Molly mentioned software as a medical device. Again, this is a big market. A lot of folks out there are designing software. Software as a medical device comes right from the FDA guidance document. I could read through this, but again, just to talk about in general, I could talk about it before. Does your software meet the definition of medical device? That's your first threshold, And this slide kind of goes into more details about what is software. I mean, if all this is software that kind of is a go-between devices, that's not a medical device. Software as a medical device is really something actually, it needs to meet the definition of a medical device. And there's some things there to see. I worked on a device at Fresenius, which was basically a closed loop controller, right? So that software is actually doing something. It's actually taking information off the patient and then adjusting our control to adjust how that machine operates. So that would definitely be considered a software as a medical device, because it's actually taking data, making interpretation, and then adjusting the treatment to that patient. So those kind of things would be an example of definitely a software as a medical device. Some of the things we talk about wellness devices are not considered devices, because it's really not making a treatment to they're basically giving just a basic indication to the user. You walk so many steps, things like that. There's things that we have, you'll see where many people now have diabetes. You'll see those kind of things where they measure their device. Those are devices. They're doing the on the arm stuff. Those are software as a medical device. It's actually taking a reading, and you can do those things. But that's really a threshold. And go this next slide here talks about what's not considered a medical device. If the software is part of a hardware medical device, it does not meet the definition of software as a medical device. Examples include, again, software used to drive or control motors, right? You're not doing any medical function there. You're not doing anything. You're just driving the motors. It doesn't mean it's not critical. Some people are confused about being a device and not being critical. That software is still very critical, but it's not a medical device.
So if you have Gary, sorry, this is me again.
Sure.
You've got software that does perform a medical function coupled with hardware that's new hardware. Are they considered one device, or do you look at them separately?
Depends actually how you sell it. But it can be, if you tend to sell that software separately, that'd be a separate device. If you plan on selling that software only with that device, it would not be.
Okay.
Because there's software when I worked on at Welch Allyn, we had software on the device itself. That software is never sold separately. So it's actually part of the device. So part of the work we did for the clearance of that device would be to do the proper software stuff, but that software is not a separate device. That makes sense. There's software that actually, you'll see the screens in the hospital, the device monitors. There's software on the device, of course. There's user interface screens, all that stuff, and that's all software driven and based. but it's not it's not a separate device.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Sure.
So Gary, before we move forward, a lot of times we are working with startups that are very, very focused on getting their medical device just right so it works, and pulling together all the parts that they need. And when they come here, they're not really focused on or haven't thought about what the classification is. And you've just walked us through, kind of what the three classifications are, what the indications for use, intended use, are there predicates, and are they substantially equivalent, and reference devices. Are these all means to research, to begin sorting out what the classification is? And if you're still not clear, do you have suggestions to startups about when it's important to find out and how they can do that?
Sure. So there's also a process we'll talk about. Is it de novo, right? There's some cases where if you go onto the FDA website and you're pretty clear on your intended use and what your product does. We won't get into this presentation, but there's things about your product codes, right? You see things FDA product codes. Those FDA product codes are basically associated with them will have the risk class associated with that. So if you know what your device is, and you have a predicate device, and it's been proven out there that that predicate device is pretty similar to your device will fall under that product code in that risk class. If you don't know, to your point, Molly, exactly what it is, you can always do a pre-submission to the FDA saying, either through a de novo and find out we don't feel there's an adequate product code or suitable product code that meets a device. So those product codes can be very specific in what they constitute in terms of the device itself. So if that's the case, the de novo question will go through. If you feel you do have two or three predicate devices, you can ask the FDA through a pre-submission, get their concurrence on, yes, we do believe you have a suitable predicate. And the benefit of having a suitable predicate is that you can go through a 510K. That means there's already, you usually have standards that you can comply to. You can refer back to that 510K that was submitted by a competitor or somebody else and find out what they did. With the de novo application, if they don't see that there is a suitable predicate, then we have to go the de novo route. De novo means it's new, right? It means it's a new device, new type of new product code had to be created. So there's two different pathways based on, but the best way to do it is get confirmation from the FDA if you're not sure of what device class your falls under.
Thank you.
Design controls. This is very important for startup companies because a lot of times, Mao and Al get involved in some of these teams. They're still doing feasibility, and once you get in feasibility, is great. You need to do feasibility before you can get a device on the market. But once you want to start taking credit for your testing, you need to have your device fall under design controls. And what that means is you're basically documenting all the design. You have pretty much have a bill of materials of how the device is made. And then you want to know, so once you feel your device is quote unquote at a finished state, you can make changes to it, don't get me wrong, but you want that it's the point where it's a design and design test results are suitable for submission to the FDA. So pretty much once you're at that point where you have a pretty confident that device that you're going to be selling and taking credit for, you want to put your design control, you want to start your design controls. And what that means, it basically means that you want to make sure that you follow the design controls. You have validation set up, you have verification testing set up, you have your design input set up, your output set up, and it's all kind of laid out. So then when you submit to the FDA, they can say, if my go back to the thermometer example, if my thermometer is supposed to be for use as an infrared thermometer, and it has to be accurate within plus or minus, a couple of degrees Celsius, the testing, of course, would have to prove that my thermometer is accurate within plus or minus a couple of degrees Celsius. That'd be one of the verification or validation steps you'd use. So they do usability testing, and it gets all part of design control that somebody can actually use a device, right? Whether somebody has big hands, small hands, those kind of things that they can actually use the device. So there's a lot of different things in play here. We talk about design controls, make sure your device is safe and effective. Getting back to our original slide here, the FDA wants to know, is this device safe and effective? Any questions on the design controls?
Do you, I imagine you may have some more stories about this, and I I don't want to put Dave Eilers on the spot, but with regard to what sometimes happens with the different elements that people need to get, and they start accumulating them, but they don't do it in a way that meets what's required for the design control. Are there examples you can give of that, of people getting ahead of themselves when they don't understand what the FDA is going to want to see with regard to design controls?
Well, the biggest thing is rework, right? I think people want to submit the device to the FDA before it's ready. So to your point there, Molly, I think a lot of folks get under design controls and realize I want to make changes to this device in the course of the FDA review. So by doing that, what happens now is they'll have to review it again, unless it's a small change. So you have to be careful. And that's one thing about, startups companies, they still want to make it better and better and better. And that sounds great. But I give an example. When I was at Welch Allyn for a big product I worked on at Welch Allyn was the international launch. I worked with the R&D team, so they understood they were doing some software. And we got the software done, to we could show the FDA that it actually worked, right? But it definitely wasn't software that was actually done. And the R&D team and I talked about it together. So again, here's the risk of doing that. So they actually had to have two software pass, right? The frozen one, which was submitted to the FDA. And then they had another one, they kept their frozen, and they made another loop and made fixes to it during the FDA process review. So it was fine, but it's risky because now you're keeping up two software versions under design controls, right? You have the one that you submitted to the FDA, then the other path. And it worked out okay in the sense that they allowed it why we did that, because it allowed us to get the FDA submission rolling, right? Under review, and allowed R&D to work in parallel during that time frame to make the updates to the software. So actually, by the time we actually sold the device in the market, it was finished software. But there's some risk there because we basically gave them it wasn't a finished device. We could sell that device, but we didn't make iterations for that device before we actually sold, quote unquote, the device we wanted to sell. So the risk there is, if the FDA came back and say, for a small company now doing that, that's a lot of risk. So now you have two things going on. If for some reason you get that crossed up, now you're looking at trying to figure out exactly what software was submitted to the FDA, because you have to, any questions come back from the FDA in terms of the review, I need to talk about that software that was submitted to the FDA, not the software they're working on now. So that's the problem. So when the information came back, when I worked with R&D to answer the questions from the response, we had to talk from that software submitted to the FDA, not the software they're working on now, not to repeat that, but it's just so important that you understand that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Really, Gary,
Sure.
So that brings up another question. Sorry to join late, but and if you cover this, I apologize. But so once you do get approval from the FDA for your device and you do make, I'll say, an upgrade, a different version that's bigger, better, faster, how significant does that upgrade need to be before you need to write back to the FDA and say, maybe it's safer and more effective or something along those lines? You're not going backwards, you're going forward. But
Sure.
As part of your post-market surveillance to let them know about an upgrade.
Yeah, and it really depends on what the upgrade is, as you mentioned, Dave. How significant is that change, right? If this is a minor software bug fix, you could do bug fixes to make it better, right? But if you're actually changing how it, even to be better, if you're changing how it works, like say that temperature example, right? If you're saying that's more or less, if you change the accuracy of that, even though it's better, it's a change. So in that case, there we have to resubmit to the FDA because you're changing what they cleared, right, or what they approved. Even though it's an improvement, that would even people think, well, I'm just making it better, right? But the FDA wants to see you actually making it more accurate. So they want to know what that means. But a bug fix, no, those bug fixes in the software you can do and not tell the FDA.
That's helpful. Thanks.
Sure. And there's a process. There's a process that the FDA for guidance that goes through basically a flow chart or what kind of changes need to be told the FDA prior to release. So what changes could this be, quote unquote, they call it a note to file, which is basically a change that the FDA doesn't need to know about. But if they do an audit of your records, they want to see you've gone through that decision tree and says, yes, we've done the decision tree. It doesn't meet the threshold for a submission, but we have documented it. And then one thing to keep in mind too is, one company for Sunny is, if you have a cumulative, one of the things I can look at is, you make many small changes. And let's say you made 30 small changes, the cumulative effect the FDA may want to be look at again. So next time you do a submission, you include all those cumulative small changes in that next submission. So if you instead, usually that's what you work on your marketing group and your R&D group about these small changes. Say, okay, we have say we have 20 small changes. We want to make a big change coming up. And you work with the marketing, okay, we'll do a new 510K, use a special 510K, say 6 months from now, and then it'll wrap up and include all those previous small changes.
So just a quick follow-up. You mentioned decision tree. Is that internal to the company, or is that something published on the FDA website?
That's published on the FDA website. That's published. Yeah.
Okay. I thought that was the case, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. So we talked about
websites change all the time.
It does. That there's just and they made it better actually over time. It was kind of unclear there for a while. We talked about submission types a little bit here. So I mentioned about a 510K. Again, that's usually for class 2 devices, risk class 2 device. There's 3 different kinds of 510Ks. You have an abbreviated, you have a special, and a traditional. So if it's the first time you're doing your device, you typically do a traditional or abbreviated. A special 510K can only be done on your device. You're basically making a change, you mentioned, David, to your device, and that change based on the decision tree would require a special 510K because it's a big enough change to your device. But usually like a traditional 510K, you'd include, all the different things that are required. If you do a special 510K, you may only change one thing, right? Maybe like I said, the example of the temperature accuracy. If you're only changing that, you're not going to supply them the whole traditional 510K. You want to supply them those sections that are appropriate to that change. So that's where that would come in. Usually special 510K is usually it's a quicker review because they've known that it's a special 510K. I've already seen the device once. You're making this one type of change, and FDA will focus on that change and look for the supporting documentation, validations, and verifications to support the particular change. You also see mentioned on note to file. Again, those changes to your device that are not that big. So as you do the decision tree, you'll find out that there's many things that don't require a quote unquote a new submission to the FDA, but do require a note to file. It basically is a document, and again, all the validation work still has to be done, but it's a note to file saying you've gone through the decision tree, and the change I'm making to this device does not require any kind of a review by the FDA. You'll see you mentioned de novo. De novo is usually for a new device. I'm actually working on one device for a client out in Europe. It's actually it's a laser, and again, it's a class 3 device, and it's the laser technology is actually used in another application, but it's not used for their application. So it will be a de novo, and they'll have to go for the de novo submission type. Because it is what that means, there's currently no product code for this type of device. So as part of that whole application process, from this, there'll be a new product code that will cover this kind of device going forward. PMA, again, pre-market authorization. This is actually a pre-market approval, I should say. This is something that requires usually for the class 3 devices. And again, requires usually a lot more clinical work, a lot more support, a lot more review by the FDA. The other one is a safe technology program. It's not really a submission type, but it is a submission to the FDA to see if you actually can get into this program. And the benefit of this program, the FDA will work with you a lot more closely. And the benefit to the manufacturer and the standpoint there, guys, is you get a quicker, hopefully, approval or clearance for your device so you can actually get it to market more quickly. Breakthrough, again, very similar. This is for more critical devices. Safer technology is one program, and breakthrough technology is very similar, but it's more for critical devices that are new technology that really fulfill a need in fixing or solving a more critical life or death type problem. Pre-submission, this is something I always recommend when I work with my clients. And basically these pre-submissions are basically a correspondence with the FDA prior to doing any kind of 510K or de novo and those type of things. And so if you have questions, like say you're trying to do clinical work, you're not sure how to proceed with that clinical work, you can work with the FDA, give them a pre-submission, so to speak, and say, we recommend doing this clinical, and do you guys concur? And it gives you some, even though it's not binding by the FDA, it does give you some assurance that the clinical work you plan on doing, or could be verification work or validation work, has some buy-in by the FDA, so you're not doing things twice. So as you do, when you do your 510K or do your de novo application or PMA, you include this information in that document saying, we had this pre-submission, we suggested this, the FDA recommended this, we do what the FDA said. So when you do your submission, they're going to say you've done these steps in what you submitted to the FDA as part of your submission type, whether it's a special 510K, traditional, abbreviated. You've got some assurance that what you're going to submit to the FDA will get cleared more quickly. So I really do recommend pre-submissions, especially when it's a complicated device. A little more detail on the breakthrough technology program and what you need to basically meet these requirements in order to qualify for this program. And there's basically two things. There's a first question, the second question, and the second question broken into 4 different subsets. The first one is getting that provide a more effective treatment for identifying life-threatening or irreversible debilitating human diseases or conditions. I guess I mentioned for more severe stuff, life-threatening type of diseases or conditions. And also, now it has to meet that first threshold. It has to be one of the 4 below. There are breakthrough technologies for which no approved or clear alternative exist. So as you go through these things, offer significant advantages over existing approval or cleared alternatives. I know Molly and I are working on one together now that the person may not meet this one, but does provide significant advantage over existing technology. There's definitely some things there, especially a lot of startup companies. Usually they're falling into these thresholds of breakthrough technology, or the next one I'll go over is STEP. And that's basically a safer technology, again, very similar, but you'll see that it's something that, again, the benefit of using these programs, you would be more in concert with the FDA. They'll respond to you quickly based on these guidance documents and how they're written. If you do qualify for these programs, they're pretty much locked into giving you quicker responses. So hopefully, you'll get your work done faster and get your device to market faster. So I mentioned the safe technology program, again, very similar. In order for a device to be included in STEP, as they call it, it should not be eligible for breakthrough devices. So this is, again, this is for less serious conditions, but pretty similar in terms of what it needs to do. It should be reasonably expected to significantly improve the benefit risk profile of a treatment or diagnostic through substantial safety innovations provided for one or more of the following. So you don't need to meet one of these requirements. You need to meet. It can't be a breakthrough device. If not a breakthrough device, you need to meet one of these 4: a reduction in the occurrence of a known serious adverse event, a reduction in the occurrence of a known device failure mode, a reduction in the occurrence of a known use-related hazard or use error, or improving the safety of the device or intervention. So if it meets one of those things, the FDA concurs with that, then you'll be eligible for the STEP program. Any questions on those or why you'd use those?
I was just going to ask about timing. So like with the patent office, you generally know, okay, make a filing, 18 months after it gets published, then there's an examiner. What is the typical 510K program, and how much faster is the breakthrough program or the STEP program?
Well, the programs, you still do a 510K, David. That doesn't, still the 510K still be done. This just gives you a lot more interaction up front before the 510K is submitted.
Oh, got it.
Doing that separate submission type is just one of those things where it's a program that allows you, hopefully, when you do your 510K, you've got some, pre-sub meetings ahead of time that when you do your 510K or de novo, it's pretty much all, it should be more, now, I'm not gonna say a slam dunk, nothing's a slam dunk, but it allows you to give some more assurances that the work you've done is the FDA has already kind of seen it, and they've kind of, according to their kind of the stamp of approval, that what you're submitting is what they wanted to see.
I think that's the big benefit of premiums, so that you're collecting the right data.
Exactly.
And that, not clearing it, but collecting the right data in advance, so there's fewer surprises.
Exactly. Yep, exactly. Talked about device standards. You'll see this term quite a bit. A regulatory standard is an approved scientific document that provides guidance, establishes performance, creates tests, and design limits or thresholds. As you mentioned about predicate devices and those kind of things, as you do, even though you do a predicate device, each device may have its own standards. You know, there's a lot of them out there, whether if it's a sterile device, of course, there's sterilization standards. If it's like a device monitor with a blood pressure, there's blood pressure cuff standards. So when you do those particular devices, each of those devices will have appropriate applicable standards that you must meet. So when you're doing your 510K or de novo, you need to show the FDA that you've taken consideration the appropriate standards, and then show your appropriate validation and verification test to the FDA that shows that the FDA that you actually met those things. So getting back to the temperature and the accuracy one, there are accuracy standards for temperature and thermometers. So as part of that device standard, you'll see they'll give you a test method, how to go about that test method, then the accuracy requirements. And as part of your validation and verification testing that you do, you show the FDA that yes, we looked at the standard, we performed this test according to the standard, and here's our test results. And again, by claiming compliance to recognized standard in a submission, you know, the FDA's has basically approved standards. They know that they meet that standard. Again, it gives them some assurance. Again, back to the original state, the device is going to be safe and effective. Because if you meet the temperature threshold or the accuracy of that standard and you meet it, they know again back to, I keep repeating it, but it's very critical that the device actually is intended to be a thermometer and is accurate to be a thermometer. So you don't want to have.
Gary, with regard, this is sort of following up on what Dave was saying about timing. I think this is another thing that a lot of medical device early stage developers are moving along, and then this kind of hits them that they have to have independent confirmation of this verification and validation. And do you want to just talk a little bit about that process and what people at an early stage might want to be thinking or planning for and anticipating these requirements?
Yeah, so it's my point. A lot of these startup companies don't realize there's third-party test sites like TUV does that. You'll see Intertech, that name mentioned about UL. You'll see UL standard for electrical stuff. So all these different labs are out there as third-party test sites or test houses. So one thing you want to establish when you're doing a device, sometimes once you get a device to a certain point, maybe at some point during the feasibility, work with your test house that you're going to use, so they can kind of see the device too. And they can kind of test, and they may give you some advice on how to make it better. So it's going to pass the, let's go back to a device monitor. There's electrical safety testing that's required for that device. So if you're doing a circuit board or some kind of things like that, as you develop that software or that circuit board, and it's that to pretty much to a finished state in your feasibility, it'd be a good point, as you pointed out, to get in contact with one of those your test house you're going to use and work with them. It's a good point. So you don't make something you think it's done, and you find out that there's clearance, right? There's when you have two wires close by, they have to be a certain space apart, right? Those are too close together, it won't pass the electrical safety because they're afraid of something. You could have a circuit jump, right? So those kind of things. That's a good point, Molly. You need to get to that point so you're not doing things twice. And that's another thing I don't get with the FDA ahead of time. It's also good to get with a test house ahead of time to make sure that the device you're making is going to meet the passing standards. Yep.
Yeah, and you also have that with regard to human, when they have to be human studies, setting up a relationship with the university to get those clinical trials in place is a huge endeavor that people don't always think about early on.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. The last thing I want to mention is promotional material and claims. And this thing here, it's basically
Can I just interrupt you one second to give
Sure.
a plug to Kathy Durden and the Central New York Biotech Accelerator, because over and over I've seen her be really helpful with regard to referring people for those clinical trials and getting information on that. I just wanted to say that before you moved into this next section.
Sure.
Thanks, Gary.
Sure. So this next thing, and Molly, I mentioned before, I mentioned before what one of my consultants know and clients I do a lot of promotional material review and claims. That's one thing people in regulatory and legal do quite a bit in the medical device field. And it all comes from basically this statement from the FDA, and it seems pretty benign, but this goes into many different things, and companies sit out there to watch their competitors say things wrong so they can jump on them for many reasons. So it's very critical if you get involved in this that, you know, it seems pretty, as you review labels and instructions for use, as you mentioned, whether it's a website, Facebook thing, it could be anything like that. Really what you want to do is, you know, you can't have anything that's misleading. You know, I've had, you know, a simple one that comes up a lot, especially as young companies don't realize, you can't use the FDA as a marketing tool. And what I mean by that, you can't say, my device was approved by the FDA. It may have been, maybe true, but, you know, FDA does not like them being used as a marketing tool. So that comes up sometimes. I know when working at Welch Allen, they had a small company, and what happened was their device was considered to be a class 2 device. And so they had to go through clearance. So what they were doing on the website saying, we have the only medical device cleared by the FDA. So where that came into play there is that because our device was very similar, but it's a class 1 device, as you know from earlier, that does not go to the FDA for clearance, right? So you can't say that, right? So even though what they're saying was true, you know, it's very misleading, right? They're saying that because they're basically, the connotation there is that, you know, because their device is cleared, their device is safe and effective, and ours is not. Not true. So a lot of our lawyers on the Welch Allen side at the time really pushed back on that, right? And it's funny because as soon as they pushed back on it, the company knew what they were doing. They want to get their foot out the door quickly so they could actually, and they took it off right away off the website. So they knew they could not do that kind of stuff. But in terms of this, you can read this through here, but really, you know, for Johnson & Johnson, who we're working for now, one of their big competitors, and the guy, my boss who I'm working for there, says that one of their competitors for one of their devices really is critical. They spend a lot of time looking at Johnson & Johnson's sites just to make sure they don't say anything that's incorrect. Because they do, of course, they're going to go to court, and of course, when you go to court, it means lots of dollars. So so it's very critical. So when I read this over, you know, because any drug or device is misbranded, if the labeling proves false or misleading in any particular, and it's very broad there. You know, like for example, if I do a promotional review, if I sit there and say, you know, I did one recently last week for Johnson & Johnson, and even though it wasn't inaccurate, the print was much bigger. They did a study and it said this thing was, say, 9% accurate, right? Then they put down in a little caveat, was not statistically significant. Well, you can't say that, guy. You can't have big bold print this thing here and then a smaller disclaimer underneath that saying not statistically significant. So my pushback to the team there was, basically you can't do that. You can put down in this particular study, it's not, it was said this is better, but you can't say that this is, you know, so they'll make the corrections, but there's so many things like that. And again, it's from a legal standpoint for any lawyers. This is something that they really get involved with quite a bit because they're more involved on the end of, you know, going to court and supporting claims. There's been, you know, multi-million-dollar cases. You know, I know they gave an example of the Johnson & Johnson with their competitors went back and forth on some things. So there's definitely something if you're in the legal field in this group here, in the medical device field, something that's very big and very important as you go forward in your career.
So Gary, just make sure I understand. So not only is your device and your software and your instructions for use, but also your promotional material, those are all regulated by the FDA. Indirectly,
yeah, exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Exactly.
Including what your reps say on the road?
Oh, yes. Yeah. You have to be very careful. You have to be very careful what they say. Yeah. They're usually the first one that are trained. Yep. They usually have point. I actually I reviewed one of those just 2 weeks ago for Johnson & Johnson. It was a internal training only for sales folks, but what they could say about what the device does. Exactly. So they're very careful. So their talking points are very, I guess, you know, gone through quite a bit by legal and regulatory to make sure they don't say anything that's false or misleading. Yep.
And don't promote off-label indications.
Correct. Exactly. And doctors can use it off-label, but you can't promote it. If doctor wants to use a device, they're a professional. That's why I had the RX only. You know, I had a device that worked for ConMed. It was for laparoscopic surgeries, and the first thing the doctor did was bend it 90 degrees. never said you could do that, but it's the first because the device is originally designed to be more for a manual. When all the kind of the Da Vinci robots came out, the way the robot came down had to be, the device wasn't it's kind of built straight out. So in order to have the device still worked, but you wanted to get it out of the way of one of the arms, he bent it 90 degrees. So we never said that, no one, but one of those things that, we don't data to prove it can be used that way. We can go back and do that, but those are the things that, right, no off-label.
You certainly couldn't put that in your training video.
No, exactly. If you use it, exactly. Don't want to do that. Then if it does break or cause a problem, then that's when you get in trouble. Exactly. So I think that's all I had for the presentation. Again, I hope this was successful in getting
Wow, that was perfect timing. You went through all of the items on your initial list and did it in such an informative way. Very, very helpful, Gary. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So join us again for Ask the Expert or Ask the Innovator. I think we're transitioning to the second Thursday of the month. And we look forward to seeing you next month. And again, Gary, thank you very much. And Kathy Durden, thank you too. The Medical Device Innovation Challenge participants have learned a lot from Gary, and I have too. And so thank you again, everybody.
Yeah, thank you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.